Welcome to A&N In Depth. Today we have a special treat for you. Kyle Portbury, Emmy Award-winning director of The Hopeful.
Every time you say that, Sam, every time you say it, I go, that sounds very impressive.
Kyle, you have, we're going to talk about your journey as a filmmaker,
Yes.
how you stumbled upon it.
Yeah.
But first, let's start with the greatest opportunity, as you see, the Adventist Church has had in the United States to have people know its history. Tell us about that opportunity.
Yeah, and I think it's an opportunity that if we don't grasp it and we don't actually take it seriously, it'll pass by and we'll go, oh, well, how come we can't do it? Oh, we missed it.
And what you're
Right.
talking about is 1 million seats
Yes.
in hundreds and hundreds of cinemas.
All the way across America, literally telling our story on the cinema screen. The
So
biggest
It's a
stage
film about
possible.
the Adventist Church.
Yes, but more importantly, it's a film about the early members. So it's a film about, first and foremost, people. Just
Right.
like you and I.
So it's
who
not
are-
about dates, it's not about events.
Nothing about that. Those are just the palette for which their lives operate on, right? So it really is a character-driven narrative, telling the real heart and graft and grime and struggle of why you and I are sitting here chatting about it today and why we go to church on Sabbath, right?
And why we try to convince the whole world that they should really take the Bible more seriously because Jesus is coming. Let's talk about the logistics first, and then we'll
Yes.
go into all
Yeah.
of the details.
Yeah.
April 17 and 18.
And 18. And that will expand, so we will get more dates if we get out and support it, right? So if, for instance, you are listening to this, don't assume that your church pastor or the elders at your church or literally the people you go to church with even know that the film exists.
It's
in the
likely they
first
have
place.
no idea.
It's likely they have no idea. And we've got 4 weeks from today, which is the 21st of March. So if you're watching this today, you're watching it in the coming days, you know, time is short. So if we don't get on to booking tickets, so if you don't go to thehopefulmovie.com, there's a big button as soon as you go to that website that says buy tickets here. Don't treat it like a normal film, right? It's not the day before, or will I go, won't I go? It's event cinema. So we only get more events if the current ones sell out.
Yeah, you were explaining this to me
Yes.
yesterday and for the last few weeks. We have 2 showings at the moment.
Correct.
As soon as those showings, 7 p.m. on April 17th, 7 p.m. on April 18th, as soon as each cinema gets more than half of those filled, the algorithm kicks in, and then there is another showing.
And then they add more screenings for that particular day, and then they add more cinemas, and then after that they add more dates. So if we want to keep our story on screens so that opportunity, and really for me, the opportunity, this is going to sound weird from the guy that made the movie, the opportunity is not the movie. The opportunity is us as Adventists having something world-class and credible to be able to take friends, family, work colleagues to, that know you're Adventist but don't really know anything about it other than that you go to church on Saturday and you haven't talked about it in the 10 years that you've known them. Because that's what we do as Adventists, right? Like, we like to shy away from any kind of meaningful conversation about our Adventism, me included. You know, and we were talking about this earlier, that part of the challenge is actually inspiring ourselves that our story is credible and something other people want to hear. And over the last 2 years of both producing this film and then taking it out to market, I've realized our story is hugely engaging to people that have never heard it before.
You
right?
went through a journey for not telling people that you were an
Yes.
Adventist.
For like 40-something plus years of my life.
And then you realize that
Yeah.
when people understand what the Adventist Church is, it's very exciting to tell them and to be associated with it and to be an Adventist. Now,
Yes.
let's talk about this opportunity in a different way. If I understood correctly, we have 2 showings at the moment.
Yes.
And if we sell enough tickets, well, we don't sell tickets. If the cinemas sell enough tickets,
Yes.
then they will expand the film for more showings, more days, more cinemas,
100%.
all over.
It's
So
like any normal film, because it is a normal film, right? So it is on cinema screens for as long as exhibition, the cinemas recognize that there's a demand for it, right?
most people go to the cinema secular people, obviously, on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, perhaps, right?
Yeah.
So if we can, if the cinemas sell enough tickets, we might get the opportunity to have our story told in cinemas up and down the country.
Correct.
From the most high traffic days, which is Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Yes. Yeah.
Now,
and that's the opportunity, right? It's just simply getting a seat at the conversation table, which I think you could easily say we have never actually had. Like, this may be the one and only chance that we get in a generation to have this conversation, sitting around a table talking with people, right? Like, and what's that conversation? Well, it's not necessarily anything more involved than, okay, so I was challenged by this thing that character said in that moment, right? Or I've had that argument with my husband or wife or kids before, just like they did. And isn't it fascinating the way that they dealt with that? And then you're sitting across a dinner table after the film, which we do all the time. I did this after I watched Oppenheimer. I actually did it after I watched Barbie. But the conversation's very different, right? Because if it's one film versus the other, those issues and those things that affect us in life are going to change from one film to the next. So with The Hopeful, those themes of anticipation and disappointment, and how do you persevere through disappointment and still maintain that sense of what you were persevering towards and anticipating before you got disappointed actually are. Like, those aren't unique to Adventism, and they're not unique to Christianity even. Like, those are universal desires that we all have. Like, we anticipate a paycheck, and if something happens in the course of that anticipation to disappoint us and the paycheck doesn't come, how are we going to persevere through whatever the next week of life is and actually keep our eye on all these other goals that we have that revolve around having a job and earning money? You know, so that anticipation, disappointment, perseverance cycle is a very human cycle, you know, and so I think it's a really valuable conversation to have with people, no matter what their faith background, if they have any or they don't, right? You don't need to be Adventist or Christian to engage with characters going through those wrestles with the big questions of life.
So let's talk about some of those characters. I was very surprised with the trailer. Yes. Because the trailer was cut by a secular company. Yeah. This whole thing has been, done by. You can tell us a little bit about all the professionals that were part of it.
Yeah.
But the company who cut the trailer, none of them were Adventists. They just looked at the film and said, what would sell the most about this film?
What resonated from their perspective, right?
Yes, what would lead people to the cinema the most to watch it and so on. Yes. And let's have us watch the trailer, and then we'll go and comment about it. Perfect. Okay, so let's watch the trailer.
Obey his word and believe. There is no time for delay.
I believe the Bible is clear. Jesus will return in but 4 short years.
I come before you today to tell you that I have been shown in vision. Father Miller's message was light. The Advent people were traveling on a path toward a bright and holy city.
This is not the first time the end of the world has been prophesied by a fool, nor will it be the last, if you do not renounce these radical ideas. You will not be welcome here in this house of worship.
This was only the beginning of our journey.
Her visions do not come from God.
But my friends, she speaks with great tenderness of the word of the Lord.
The Holy Spirit encouraged our Advent hope. There were people who didn't listen and they fell off the path.
I really believe this doctrine which you preach. I was lost, and now I'm found.
We must follow the word of God over the rule of men. We feel love, the love of Jesus. It lifts us up, it carries us forward. And it will guide us home.
I was made for you.
All right. I would not have cut it this way, Kyle.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing, right? And this is what you realize when you work with people who are coming at it with fresh eyes, right? They've not necessarily had...
Would you have cut it this way? Because
No.
there you've got
No, not at
as
all.
an Adventist,
Yeah.
you want to focus on the things that humans have in common,
Yes.
just like you were doing now.
Yes.
And yet, when they looked at it, I said, hold on a minute. Preacher is kicked out of all the churches, but
Yeah.
raises a movement.
Yeah.
And then there is this religious leader who is a woman in the 19th century, and nobody believes her, but she goes through
Right.
anyway. That's the film.
Yes. And that is actually the film. And when you look at... I think it's really been fascinating to me is how appealing some things that we take for granted and, in fact, have almost, like, gotten so sick of hearing that they've lost whatever influence or inspiration power that they ever had, right? So in this day and age for us, we say Ellen White is Adventist, and everyone like either groans, right? It's almost an eye roll moment for Adventists at this point, or it's a, well, we've got to really convince you of her validity. What's fascinating when someone connects with her in 2024 without any of that baggage that we've added to her life. What's really appealing to people is they're confused about how someone who should not have any agency or sway in a man's world in the 1800s actually
Fourth
did.
grade, fifth grade education.
It's like, how is this even possible? And they recognize the miraculous nature of that. And that's fascinating to me. And then they'll go away after watching the film with you, and you'll see them again the next day at breakfast or, because you're there doing something together. And they'll have gone and they'll have researched her, and they will tell you that they just discovered that, did you know that like the Adventist Church is the largest Protestant healthcare network on the planet now? I'm like, no, I didn't know that. And then you've got to go Google it. You're like, oh, wow, we actually are. Well, that's pretty incredible. And they'll tell you about they came across ADRA, and they're like, oh, this is really like, look at all the stuff that this organization does that was spearheaded by and large by a very small group of people in the northeast of the US in the 1800s is like actually quite inspiring.
What excites me the most, Kyle, about this is the fact that our story has been told in many screens. Television screens, we've told our story. Even projector screens in different auditoriums,
Yes.
we've told our story. More recently, in many different ways, through our mobile phones, we told our story. Through our computers, we told our story. So we told our story across all the screens, except the original screen, which was cinema. This is our chance to have that story told in the larger screen. Why is that exciting? Because it's the last screen that people are not distracted.
Well, I had to turn my phone off because otherwise it would distract me.
See?
Even sitting in my pocket, it's sitting over there because if you've got it on you or on the
It
table...
will distract you.
Yes.
So when we tell our story on computers, people are scrolling. When we tell it here, people are scrolling. But in cinemas, for that hour and a half, 2 hours, they put their phone down, they turn it off, and they absolutely focus on what you are telling them.
If you are in a cinema that I'm in and your phone screen comes on and I'm sitting anywhere near eyeshot of that,
Oi, you.
I literally
off.
am that person. I'm like, if you want to talk on your phone, go out into the lobby. Because I came for a cinema experience, right? I didn't come to listen to you chat to your mum.
So how many people can you imagine we could have dedicating an hour and a half, 2 hours of their lives to being inspired by the story of how God brought this movement into existence?
But also being provoked by how would I respond to life situations that these characters are dealing with, right? So I love provocation, and that's why I go to cinema. So it's interesting to me, Sam, that you brought up this, we've told our story on all these different screens. The contract of those screens for an audience is very, very different to the contract that happens between you, the audience, and the cinema. So the contract of cinema is, I'm going to dedicate 90 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours of my time, depending on how long the movie is. The Hopeful's only 90 minutes. It's like classic 90-minute, 3-act structure storytelling, right? So if I'm going to do that, I want to be taken on a magical journey You know, I want to be transported to a time or a place. I want to meet people I wouldn't meet otherwise.
I want to feel things.
I want to feel feelings that I would never feel comfortable feeling potentially in real life. Like if I feel loss in real life, that has real consequences. And I don't want to feel necessarily the consequences of that loss all the time. But I do want to experience it because those things help to shape how you're going to deal with it potentially in your own life when you do feel it. So having an environment where you go in and you're allowed to think, feel, and do on your own without anyone telling you how you should respond to it afterwards, that's the contract of cinema. I don't want somebody telling me how I should think or feel in response to what I just watched. I want to walk away and I want to mull over that, and I want to talk to my friends afterwards, and I want to be challenged by how they saw one thing, and I want to challenge them on how I saw something else. And you get to debate and talk, but it's yours. And that's, I think, the important thing about why cinema, right? Because it's our story. But
you construct the meaning. Each person construct their own meaning.
Correct.
About our story.
And then it becomes their story, right? It's not just our story. You're actually literally going out into the community and giving your story to other people to do with what they will. And I've watched this time and time again with people that have worked on the film with me, including up to the point where we're doing, the marketing for the release right now. The people that are working on it, when a film becomes your film, even if it's the paid job that you're doing, this is our movie, I can engage with this can be mine. It's now no longer that film that somebody else did or that film for those people. It's a story for me. And it becomes personal. Those characters become relatable on a level of, well, I got this engagement with them. It made me think this when I saw them do that. And that's yours. Nobody else is telling you how to think about it. They're not telling you, well, you should find this moment important because.
Tell me about the people that you worked on the film with.
Yeah, I mean, we were really blessed to get some of the most well-respected and known practitioners, particularly on the post-production side in Hollywood today.
Tell me.
So my color grade. So when you see a film in cinemas, it has a very particular look and feel to the picture side of it. So that's got to be really crafted and designed by someone that knows how to take the intent of the cinematographer on set and then interpret that into a feel for a cinema audience later on. So, and it may change because of the way that you edit, right? So the way that you intended that scene to act on the day you shot it may actually not be the way it functions in the film. So you have to, one of the things that you learn when you start really getting excited and deep diving into storytelling for screen is that visual literacy is very, very different to written literacy or even oral literacy, right? Like there's something about visual that when you understand how simple things like certain colors make us feel a certain way, certain compositions on screen, the way that shapes look in that frame of a cinema has a certain effect on us, even down to the sequence of, you go from a wide to a mid to a close-up, and when you mix those sequences up and when you change the way that your characters are moving in screen, they all have an effect on the way I as an audience read that story.
The way that I look at it with other arts, and it's the same here, is that the filmmaker or the team has felt something.
Yeah.
And through their craft, they're going to help you feel the same thing.
Yes.
So if you have somebody that only has, let's say, 1,000 hours of photography.
Correct.
They are not good enough to make you feel what they felt.
Yeah. They haven't learned how to do it repeatably enough yet to be able to guarantee that they can get there. And it's that old thing about 10,000 hours, right?
Yeah, so 10, 20, 30,000 hours of doing something. You now know how to convey these feelings and how to help the viewer, the reader,
Yeah.
whoever, to do the same. So it's
Yeah.
the same for writing, it's the same for everything.
Yeah.
So what you're describing there is the complexity
Craft.
of all of these elements.
Yes.
And in cinema, I've learned that everything matters.
Oh,
So-
every detail, every pixel on that screen, and every sound in every speaker in the cinema is absolutely on purpose. And if it isn't, then you're missing a beat.
You're talking about color gradients before.
So color grading, so that, there's only a handful of people in the world that can do it at that 10, 20, 30, 40,000 hour kind of level, where you go, I want to feel like this, and in 20 to 90 seconds they can go, and then all of a sudden you're sitting there and you're going,
Whoa.
okay, that'll do. That feels exactly how I want to feel in that moment, right?
Amazing.
And then you add on dialogue into there in the mix, and sound effects and music into there. And now all of a sudden you have this orchestra of sight and visual and sound
Cohesively making you feel the same thing.
that is just taking you on a ride that you want to do in cinema. So we were really fortunate. We got an incredible colorist, Brett Manson, who did Elvis for Baz Luhrmann, and one of my favorite films of the last 10 years called The King, which is on Netflix. Timothy Chalamet, Joel Edgerton, directed by fabulous Australian director David Michaud. So when you get someone of that caliber to come in and work with you, it's actually joyful, because you watch this story that you've always hoped was going to play out on a world-class level, actually suddenly becoming world-class minute by minute in front of your eyes. And it's actually really, really humbling, because you're sitting there going, man, there is zero reason that this film should be in this position right now. Like, it's not my cleverness. Like, it's not because Kyle's a great director.
You talk about this all the time, how
Yes.
it was God who opened all the doors, otherwise this will never have happened.
100%, because how does he have an exact window of availability that matches ours? Because we were inflexible with that. Normally, to get these people, you've got to be able to be flexible and work around their other schedules of commitments. But also, they're only doing it if they go, this is not going to embarrass me, right?
Of course.
Because
their name will be attached
because their
to it.
name's going to be attached to it. His name is in the credits. Everyone's going to look at that and go, Brett worked on this?
And thereafter, everything will be shaped by the quality of their
Because they-
last production.
Yes, they're going to look at the last things that you did. So these guys are always assessing whatever they say yes to based on two factors. Is this going to embarrass me professionally? And can I sit in a studio with this guy for 110 hours and not feel like I want to do myself harm afterwards, right? Like, can I actually sit and have a nice time 10 hours a day? Because Brett and I literally sat in a dark cinema together for 10 hours straight every single day.
Wow.
We did not leave that room. People bought us food, water, and that was it. Like, we walked
That's
in
intense.
there and walked out at the same time every day. And,
And that's just the
tomorrow.
color grading.
That's just color grade.
So
Yeah.
what about the editing?
So editing was my long time. I've edited with a gentleman called Ben Lee, he was the first assistant editor for Lee Smith, who did the Batman movies for Christopher Nolan. He also worked a lot with a guy called Mark Warner, who did, films like Driving Miss Daisy, which I think Mark was nominated for an Oscar for editing. So when Ben became the lead editor in his own right, he and I basically met at about that time. And realised that we had similar philosophies about storytelling and art, and we could argue really constructively in the edit suite together. And he's fabulous because, he's Buddhist, and he will challenge you on, well, why are you leaving that bit of your story out?
Because
Right?
you're too familiar with
Because
it
you're
to
so
know that,
100%. You're so familiar with the way that this story has always been told, and your prejudices and biases towards it sometimes blind you to the fact that actually this thing that I would be like, ooh, I don't know that we can show that, right, is actually the thing that people find really interesting. And so you kind of constantly check, and he would help me check and balance as well, things like, is this, are we erring now into a preachy moment and we're missing character just for the sake of it. No, we are. So let's cut that line out. And all of a sudden, the scene stays real.
This is a constant tension.
Yes.
In Christian cinema.
100%. And you can't preach for a second
because
at people.
Our art form, and there is a bigger historical reason. Here's my reading of it, okay?
Yes.
And I may be completely wrong, but here's my reading. There was a great influence in the pilgrims that came from Europe to America by Puritanism.
Yeah.
Which is the diminishing of all arts because they may have a bad influence on you.
Yeah.
So if this kind of music
yeah.
is bad, then all music is bad except this very narrow view of this.
Yeah.
So when you have the growth of art in the U.S., you have Catholics and Jews did not go through a Puritan period.
Yeah.
So they dominated cinema, the original art, in the sense that I'm saying it's not the original art, but in the sense that I'm talking about, it's the first screen.
Yeah, and particularly in the early days of cinema, right? Like they recognized its potential for telling a story that didn't need explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
While Christians basically just left, Protestants to be precise, just left cinema alone for many years. And then in the 90s, maybe 2000s, there was a resurgence. But the first films, you see it. There's a 12-minute sermon in the middle of the dialogue of the film. Because we've been so used to telling that we struggle to show instead. Yeah. And in film, don't tell me, show me.
Yeah.
And so I think there is a renaissance, or at least the beginning of professionals that are Protestant, not least Adventist, who are now beginning to really understand, 2-3 generations down.
I just want to tell a good story, right? Like that's all it actually is. People are smart enough, modern audiences are smart enough and intelligent enough to work out anything. And
Jesus was also in this conundrum in a way because he told stories that many people just didn't get. Sometimes his disciples didn't get it either. And you can see his frustration even in the way they told those narratives and those parables.
And yet he never ever kind of did that thing that you see a lot, which is, okay, let me over-explain it to you. Like he would always...
Sometimes he wouldn't explain at all. He'd just tell the story and ask a question and be done.
To their frustration, right? And I think that's a really good... it's a really good way of looking at how to effectively provoke people. Because that's what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to provoke them to think differently about an issue or a subject.
And eventually act differently, too. Yeah. That's the point.
To do that, yeah. So, I mean, that to me, therein lies the benefit of... it would surprise a lot of people, I think, to know that there was only 2 Adventists in major heads of department on this film, in the production side of it. Myself directing and the composer, Blake Robinson. Only 2 people who are actual practicing Adventists. And somebody said to me the other day, whoa, isn't that a bit dangerous? I said, no. Because what happens, let me pose this question back to you, Sam. What happens if for some reason or another that film never saw the light of day after you finished it? So if somebody said to me, so Kyle, was it worth making the film even though no one saw it? I'd be like, well, actually, at this point, 1,600 people have seen it and engaged with it. And for those 1,600 people, this is their story now too, right? Like I'm on WhatsApp groups with industry people in Australia that I'm friends with. No, never even heard of Adventism before working on this film. It's their story. They see a post about it on a billboard in New York for a couple of days, 2-3 weeks ago, and they're sending that to all of their friends in the Australian film industry going, look at this incredible movie that we worked on, and we're so proud of it. Look at it's getting released on cinemas in the US on 1,000 screens.
Our hospitals hire great physicians who are not Adventist, great nurses who are not Adventist, because they're very competent at what they do. Why would we not hire an editor who is very competent at what they do? So for me, it's not even worth too much of our time because it's so obvious.
Yes.
What about Jonas? You mentioned Jonas was part of it. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so Jonas Myron, who's there's 2 original songs in the film, Hope Is on the Way and Made for You, which were written and performed specifically for the movie. So they exist for no other reason other than they are core integrated character arc storytelling in The Hopeful.
But you are releasing them on Spotify
Yes.
and YouTube Music,
Yeah,
Apple Music,
they're
etc.
coming out as songs on their own, and they will be out on all of those major. Anywhere you consume your music, they will be available in.
And if you go to thehopefulmovie.com, you will find the music there when it comes out.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Last question.
So he wrote. So I should say though, if you've ever sung 10,000 Reasons or Cornerstone in church,
Matt Radman,
Jonas wrote both of those songs.
Huh.
Yeah, and in fact, 10,000 Reasons just became the most played Christian song of all time about 2 weeks ago.
Really?
Yeah.
It took over.
Yeah.
Imagine.
Yeah,
Can
or
only imagine.
or Oceans or something. I forget which it was, but it's now like literally the most played Christian song of all time. And he also writes. He's written some incredible songs for Andrea Bocelli. He's written for Celine Dion and Barbra Streisand. And so again, you're talking about. He and I met on a film that we were both working on a few years ago, and kind of realised that we had a similar philosophy and understanding of how music and visual and rhythm and timing kind of work, even though I'm not musical at all, right? Like, I don't sing, I don't play an instrument.
We can relate about that.
But he and I have a really strong understanding of how those 2 worlds can work together to create something that neither of them could do on their own.
Which is to make people feel things that
that you wouldn't have felt otherwise.
Yeah.
So he watched a really early rough cut of the film, and I'd said to him, if you feel inspired by it, see what comes out. And what came out were 2 of the most beautiful demos I've ever heard, which then forced me to rethink the entire approach that I was taking to telling that story.
Wow.
So his gift and art actually changed the entire approach I was going to do to the edit on that movie from the get-go. So I edited the movie completely differently from that point onwards. And then when we came to finish those in post-production, as they sit in the whole score, the guys were so inspired by what we'd done in the edit in response to their original inspiration that it inspired them, and the final songs that you hear in the film, and also the ones that you'll hear as the radio versions, are by far and away different because of that. So when you've got that collaborative spirit of people going, well, I'm going to iron sharpen iron. I'm going to allow myself to be inspired by your art and your gifts, and I'm going to then inspire you with yours, and you're going to be open to receive that as well. And then you get this magical thing that you wouldn't have possibly been able to do on your own. And that's why I love filmmaking, Sam. It's a team sport.
Yes.
And you can't claim, look at what I have created. It becomes, look at what we were able to do, and look at the story we're able to share. And that it allows people an entry point, right? And it also means that you can allow space for look at what God did in this process.
Absolutely.
We wouldn't be here and we wouldn't have had the opportunities. I mean, we sound mixed in literally the best sound mixing stage for cinema on the planet at the moment, with the team from some very big movies, including Mad Max Furiosa that's coming out shortly, Poker Face that Russell Crowe did last year for Netflix. I mean, you're talking like top talent for whom, one of the guys who was our re-recording mixer, Glenn Butler, actually said to me at one point during our final mix in that studio, he was like, Kyle, this is one of the most fun experiences I've had mixing a film. And he's saying this about an Adventist movie, Sam, right? Like, so for me, who's always had a bit of a complex about, I want to be a credible filmmaker, right? So I want to be taken seriously. So I better not get tarred and feathered with the brush of Christianity, and certainly not with the brush of being an Adventist filmmaker, right? So to be sitting in there and hearing people who are doing top work actually go, we are having so much fun telling our story together, is just, I mean, you can't help but walk out of there. I would walk out of there with the biggest smile on my face every day.
I bet.
Just going, I don't understand why you've given me this experience, but wow, I'll take it.
In the next episode, we are
Yeah.
going to explore how you stumbled upon filmmaking. We don't
Yes.
have time in this one.
Yeah.
But I don't want to end without asking the obvious question, which is, what do you think is the future of cinema evangelism? Because for the last many decades,
Yeah.
we have discouraged our members from going to the cinema.
Yes.
We have Ellen White quotes that directly go against theater.
Which weren't even made at a time when cinema existed, by the way.
So
Sam.
let's come to that in a minute.
Yeah.
So we've had all of these very dark, prejudicial views of cinema and
Yes.
filmmaking. And then, we were watching the same movies at home. So then the question became, maybe it's not the medium. Maybe it's the
storytelling.
The story that you were seeing and what
Yeah.
what kind of content you were exposing you and your family
Yeah.
to. So that kind of shifted the discussion in the last 20, 30 years. But now we have cinema and evangelism being talked about in an official podcast of the Seventh-day Adventist World Church that is encouraging people to go and buy tickets
today, literally while you're watching
in groups,
Yes.
to take as many people as possible
Yeah.
to go to the cinema.
Yeah.
How do you see that transition? What do you think the future of cinema is? How do you think more conservative, traditional Adventists should see this? Did Ellen White really say not to go to the cinema? So go through that whole process for me.
So no, she didn't, because cinema did not exist when she said that. And
So when she says theater, it's not the
she
cinema.
meant, no, and it's also one very specific theater in a very specific time and place, and she was saying that to a very specific person, because what was happening in that theater, which was basically vaudeville, was people were going there and they were making transactions in the audience, and you did not want to be in that environment. So when you put it in the context of why she said it, to whom, and at what point in time, I don't know why we attributed it to cinema, because literally cinema had not even been invented when she said that.
So Hope Studios is an arm of Hope Channel.
Yes.
Who's invested in the film.
Correct.
And is helping to bring it out to the world.
Yes.
So this is the official television network of the Adventist Church, who has an arm that they created for cinema evangelism.
Yeah.
Have you guys talked to the White Estate to see if they
Yes.
agree with your reading just now?
And they were stunned, because they settled this question, they thought, like 20, 30 years ago.
The White Estate thought they had settled this question 20, 30 years ago.
But it turns out no one paid attention to the settling of that question, right? So if you go onto the White Estate and you look it up, there's like a lot of stuff written about it, And it's just that we have not re-engaged with that conversation to even understand, or pointed it out, or made any big deal about whether or not that is even valid to look at. I think sometimes if we don't look at the context, we were talking about this at dinner last night, right? There's that great clip of George W. Bush going, "Now watch me take this golf swing."
Just after he talked about terrorism.
Just after he talked about terrorism, and it's been used time and time again as how tone deaf the guy was, right? Now, this isn't a political statement. This is me literally just pointing out that if you watch that clip in its full context, there was a reporter who said, before the terrorism question got asked, can you show us your golf swing, Mr. President? And then the other guy interjects and goes, right, just before you do that, can I just get one more question in about the war on terror?
Yes. So he answered the question on terror.
So he answered,
turned to the other reporter,
turned to the other guy and said, "Now watch me
golf."
take this golf swing."
I
Right.
see.
And so when you watch it in context, you realize that he's not flippantly just brushing aside the weight and severity and importance of what he just said,
but removing
he's simply just referring back to the original question he was asked before the other guy interjected.
Removing the context is the easiest way to manipulate people into your point of view.
Yeah.
So, which is,
and also
it can be ignorant or dishonest depending on.
The easiest path in any discussion is cynicism, right? It's easier to be cynical and to to be flippant about something than it is to be passionate and invested in
Sure.
it. You know, so anytime somebody has the opportunity to be just like, this, you know, there's no actual thought process in that. It's just reactionary. There's no contemplation. There's no reflection necessary. It's just easy. You can throw it away and move on. So I think that what we really need to do as a movement is take a good, long, hard look at why we think what we think on certain fundamental things like cinema, for instance. Because if we don't look at that, we're going to miss a very big opportunity over the next 10, 20 years for Adventist creatives to be able to tell stories that engage an audience in one really clear thing, Sam, the hope and healing message that Adventism was given. That's it. That's literally the most important message.
Which we are commanded to proclaim
yes,
to everyone.
100%.
In every screen.
In every screen. And in every, you know, just
every format,
facet
every media,
of your life, right?
Yeah,
Like
face to face,
yes.
it doesn't matter.
It's if you look at the world today, it can sometimes be a very dark and scary place. And if all we're doing is contributing hope and healing to the conversations around us or to the lives of the people that we interact with, and it can be simple little things or it can be major things in their life. But if we are simply communicating that, we are fulfilling the hope that I think our early members always looked at was possible if we saw that clear character of Christ.
Indeed. Kyle, thank you for joining us at A&N In
Pleasure,
Depth.
Sam.
And thank you for listening or watching this. If you haven't yet, while you were listening, please go ahead and visit thehopefulmovie.com. Thehopefulmovie.com. The link is in the description on YouTube. You can tell us what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Can you also tell us how many people you're taking?
Yes.
If you are taking, that would be very helpful. It's like, I got 25 tickets. It is very important that we mobilize now. On the even the week before, if we haven't secured at least 500,000 tickets, the film will not stay for the weekend, and God only knows the number of people that will miss their opportunity to look at the miracles of the calling of our church and the mandate that God gave us to proclaim that everlasting gospel, bringing freedom, healing, and hope to many people as they contemplate the character of Christ. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And I hope to have your comments on YouTube if you find us.